Dear heads on the wall, dear heads on the wall, always watching you. Hey! Dear heads on the wall, dear heads on the wall, always watching you. Dear hunter shot Bambi, Bambi took the fall.
It is May 9th. It is a Saturday. We are in the Tribog area today, and we are looking for a sign, ever-increasing greenery that is the changing of the seasons, the filling in ferns and things like that. And we're going to see what we find. It's a little bit of a rainy day today, and I had an internal debate whether I was going to make this the first trip to Vermont. Right now, by contrast, it is probably just below 55 degrees right now. Manageable up there. Today is going to be drizzling rain. The real feel is going to be about 23 degrees in May, which is less than ideal. Having driven over a certain mountain to get there, it can be damn dicey, so I decided I was going to come down here, and unfortunately I'll have to not get there next week due to work-related situations, but in the next 2 weeks I will be making a return there, but it isn't going to be today. Today we're here, and we're going to look around and see what we find. So let's get moving, and we'll see what that entails. Thanks. We are by the beaver pond where we usually start out our stroll through the woods looking for signs of things other than just myself and deer and moose and the like out here. I've already seen signs of deer. The complimentary moose track and or poo is not yet been sighted, but I'm sure they're about. Some things to discuss today, not per se Bigfoot related, and I haven't actually looked at them yet, but the U.S. Air Force and or the government has dropped more UFO files, disclosure files, and there are two trains of thought you could potentially have here. Number one, with all the potential things that the government could be false flagging us with aliens as a lovely distraction value that aliens bring to the table in light of other things like, oh, I don't know, gas prices rising because we are doing Israel's dirty work. Regardless or not of whether you agree with the war in Iran or not, and I will admit I have mixed feelings, because on the one hand, there ain't any time in the near-term future that we and they are going to be exchanging Christmas cards. That's a given. However, I do feel the need, aside from the hacking and wheezing I'll be doing, because we're in the height of what's called the pollinating, or aka allergy season. Were they an imminent threat to us, or more likely an imminent threat to Israel? And being the charming ally of convenience that they are, and yes, that's all I see them as, and that doesn't make me a traitor to America, because if you mean America first, then why are we helping Israel with their own problems when they have such a high-tech military? Let them handle their shit, and we can do other things like waste tax money on ballrooms that nobody except for a certain president seem to give two shits about. If you do believe in it and you care about it, you're an idiot, because right now behind my car, in my parking spot back home, there's a pothole that needs filling. Guess which one I care more about? Funny how that works. Anyway, that's where we're going to leave politics for the most part, other than to say that Connecticut has more than likely passed the Glock ban, which at this point in the game bans future sales of convertible Glocks. And this is an interesting thing, because if I remember reading right, the Glock company is actually working on a new version of it that is not convertible, and therefore skirts around this charmingly redundant law, because in Connecticut state law, ironically, fully automatic weapons were already illegal to own, and the act of converting a semi-automatic weapon to a fully automatic weapon was already illegal, much like the gun ban in polling places is also illegal when you consider that most polling places, at least in my state, are schools and or government buildings where having a gun on the premises is already illegal again. What you have is the state government doing this lovely little window dressing thing that makes redundant laws and probably contradictory laws if they're true to form, and quite honestly, that's just a bunch of fucking bullshit. Now, as it stands, the gun that I have on my person right now is a traditionally hammer-fired, not striker-fired, non-9mm. I'm not going to say specific make and model because it's really not anyone's business but my own, but there is wording in the bill, because yes, I actually have read this bill top to bottom, and there's wording in that bill that specifically says that a hammer-fired, and therefore non-convertible pistol is not on this list. Quote, unquote. So, yeah. But we are getting to a point, I fear, where the gun-grabbing left is going to try to freaking disarm the population, and that should be something that concerns you, because across the border right now in Rhode Island, there is a bill that's trying to undo grandfather clause things. And what that basically translates to, if you don't want to freaking see this see the forest through the trees, or the trees through the forest, depending on your analogy, that means that the guy from the government comes to your front door and he's going to take your stuff that 10 years ago you bought perfectly legally and in good faith. He does not have a warrant. He does not have a check to compensate you for your purchase. Now, maybe if you're not a gun person or somebody who's pro 2A, that doesn't bother you that much. But here's the thing. Take guns out of that equation and turn that into eminent domain where they're coming for your house. Now you have a random politician showing up at your door with a hard hat and a golden shovel and a sheriff's deputy and a film crew and a construction crew, and they tell you at your front door, you have 5 minutes to gather what you can and get the bleep out of your house because we've decided that your lawn needs to be a new on-ramp, and if you don't, we're going to arrest you. So the government has now decided that you have the choice between being homeless on the street or being in jail. In that moment, if we ever got to that point, you're going to want that gun. I'm willing to bet. Because that's what we're talking about. And in case you're wondering if I'm a Democrat, that's exactly why I am not a Democrat, nor am I a maggot. I am a freaking independent, and you should be too. We're done. That's the end of politics, but yeah. Going back to the UFO disclosure files, two schools of thought. One, what are they trying to distract us from? Which is kind of how we got to politics in the first place. Because you're talking about the government, so with the government comes talk of politics. It's kind of like you can't really do one without the other. However, if on the other hand, they actually are disclosing actual files for whatever reason, there comes a point to consider in a grander scheme of things just how big the bleeping universe is, with hundreds of billions of galaxies, and our own galaxy has hundreds of billions of stars. It's a big place out there. To be on a level where we have with the insane level of hubris to believe that we're the only thing in all of that, even as we've discovered that water, one of the cradle stones of life, I'm not sure if that's the right term, but I don't care in the moment, water is not such a rare thing out in the universe. Turns out it's actually fairly common. So the odds of the Fermi paradox playing out are, in my mind, microscopic. And if Area 51 and Roswell and all this other stuff was not something that actually happened, the government would be better served if they just said, look, it never happened and that's where we stand on it, let's move on. But they don't. They keep, anytime anyone brings it up, it's a freaking supernova at the right angle to freaking swamp gas or some completely inanely stupid explanation. they always have to have a comment ready. There might actually be a reason why. Have we encountered aliens? I gotta believe we have. The thing I have trouble with, however, is that every effing alien out there happens to be something that looks like us. Like Star Trek is bullshit. You're more likely to run into some freaking 5-tentacled fucking octopus looking thing that breathes methane than you are believing the internet narrative that every gray out there, I even gave that away, every alien out there is some little dude this big with a big bulbous head and big black eyes that don't blink and otherwise looks like us. That for some reason has nothing better. They have all this technology to drive us to drive themselves from Zeta Reticuli to Earth. And the only thing they can think to do is grab some hick out of their F-150, drag them aboard, and then poke them in the ass with a fucking probe. What kind of a fucked up society would that be? Think about that. Or mutilating cattle or other weird shit. Why, with people with near Star Trek level crazy technology levels, need to do this? I mean, quite honestly, what kind of fucked up priorities does such a society have? Think about that. I think a much more likely first contact scenario is you make contact with the methane breathing octopus people, and they're in some weird ass hyper crazy advanced ship, and they're trying to talk to us, but because they're octopuses and they can understand complex math, and that's about it. That's probably where the conversation ends, is an exchange of mathematics. Yeah, okay, you know how to do long division, and so do we. Let's tackle theorems and physics and shit like that, and then we have a nice little exchange of knowledge with that. But then when it comes down to like conversational stuff like how's your Aunt Squidly, we can't get that far because who knows what the fuck they think. Because it's a methane breathing octopus thing. Who knows what the hell that thing thinks. On Earth alone, you have individually minded animals. So what is intelligence? You have crows that can remember people that have wronged them across multiple generations. If somebody from HR sees that, or somebody sees you doing that and reports you to that HR department, you're getting fired. And depending on where you are, there are, like it or not, the reality is, and I'm going to touch on this just because we're on that subject now, there are, like it or not, certain subjects that are going to be sensitive to certain demographics depending on where you work. Now, the vast majority of these people getting fired seem to be either nurses or teachers. Now, in one respect, you have the ability to influence impressionable children, depending on the age of your students, with radical ideology, should you have. And here's the reality. If you're expressing opinions that you're regretting that a certain act did not go to fruition, and your kid comes home and you're a radical Trumper, and you hear the kid saying, well, my teacher said this, I'm willing to bet more likely than not you're going to be calling up the school to talk to the principal and or the superintendent of schools, and you're going to express some concerns in what your kid is getting exposed to. Or just if you're a responsible parent, because Johnny doesn't need to be radicalized at the age of 8. So, yeah. The other demographic is nurses, and in this case, think about this. You have people that are engaged in being trusted in the health care of people regardless of their political affiliation at the time. espousing desires of violent outcomes for people whose opinions they don't agree with. I don't want that person caring for me. And that is regardless of whether or not I agree with their politics or not. I don't want that person caring for me because that person is going to come across as a bit of a radical loon capable of violence I don't want to deal with. But you also have the nurses that are basically out there doing stupid dances on TikTok. I guess we're going to call it TikTok. Facetiously TikTok, but doing silly dances on there while they're on the clock and while you have a patient in the background under heavy medication. Because apparently when you were spending all that money on nursing school, you never heard about this thing called HIPAA. If the patient is exposed to public social media without their consent, you have violated HIPAA. You're getting fired. Don't do that. But from personal experience, there are certain subjects you have to tread lightly on, and yes, you have a right to a First Amendment opinion and all those things. However, working in certain environments, you have to have a certain level of gentility in how things are expressed. Now, in general, the age-old adage was that when you are working anywhere, you leave religion and you leave politics at home because you're going to angry up the workplace, and your higher-ups and your HR folks are not going to want that. And these are subjects you have to tread very lightly on, and I have seen both subjects do exactly that. In one case, and this is specifically a manufacturing environment, there was a person who put up outside his cubicle a series of daily affirmations along a certain sect of Christianity, and for whatever reason, this radically offended a different person in a different department, and it turned into a stink. Now, the person, to my knowledge, never actually tried to push his brand of Christianity on anyone directly, but putting this outside his cube was enough to piss people off. Personally, I don't think this person did anything wrong, but once the stink is made, the problem is once the stink is made, and HR then has to take action one way or the other, and depending on who they side with is going to be maybe not as impartial as you think, because the reality of HR is they're not there to protect you. They are there to protect the company. And regardless of righteousness, what's going to actually be the thing that wins in a thing like that, if you don't get this and how this works, is going to be the thing that causes the company the least amount of liability. You could be right for all the right reasons, but if you're going to generate bad press for the company, you're probably still going to come out on the losing end. That's an unfortunate reality. We have, in the distance, muffled by my incessant ranting, but you have over there a wood knocking resembling sound that's probably a large woodpecker, but we'll try to lower our volume in order to listen into that. But other examples are, if you're working in a school system, things to not bring up. You have impressionable kiddies and things of that, and number one, do not go anywhere near A, race, or B, LGBTQ anything, because in a blue-oriented city, inner city school system where I was working for a while, you have training that is basically sensitivity training. Whether you agree with it or not, it is mandatory. And resultingly, these are subjects that should probably not come up. Which is not to say that you can't wear like a crucifix around your neck or something if it's not like something where you're pushing it on someone, but hello, small bird. Actual wildlife. Kind of bopping around a tree and doesn't seem that worried that we're here. The other thing is pushing too hard in being, and this is one for me, being vocally, loudly pro Second Amendment, because with the active shooter sensitivity in a school environment, that's going to go against you. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand why somebody's going to feel that way, because this is the state where Sandy Hook happened, and there is, to this day, a very brazen sensitivity to that kind of a thing because of that. Incidentally, we happen to be aware of a situation where I know the parties involved indirectly, where a young man has recently thrown away much of his life due to a regrettable choice of actions involving a minor in that same very town. So the legal drama has, I do like legal drama, so that's why we're covering this, because it kind of segues into that. I am, for obvious reasons, not going to mention names, because though I'm not under any gag order, I, out of respect to people that I know, and more to the point my better half knows, we'll leave names out of it. Fortunately, the victim was not directly harmed in any way, so there is that. But the person got caught and got arrested. And I find the outcome of the trial and the sentencing to be interesting, because on the one hand, this is allegedly a quote-unquote first-time offender, but I find the need to side with the victim's family in, like, this is not a first-time offender as much as this is the first time this person got caught. The tendencies to try to do things like that tend to happen, or manifest is probably a better word, at the same time that somebody is going through puberty or is triggered through something at that age, more or less. And I think I have to go around, because that's going to turn into poo. Unless there's a way to go out onto the meadow, which is what my ultimate goal is for today. So the person got caught, and unfortunately for them, they got caught, A, trying to destroy evidence, and B, flee the scene after the youngster did the right thing and alerted their parents to what had happened. And why the fuck you would think you'd be able to get away with this in a crowded freaking place where you were, I have no idea. But that is what happened, and the ultimate punishment seems to be a 2-year diversionary program, which personally I think, but I have actually talked to this with people close to the subject, and even family members of the perpetrator do believe this is not enough. Basically, this person has to go and attend therapy sessions for 2 years under court supervision, which means more than likely they probably also have a probationary officer of some kind or something similar. But I can see a punishment for that, for like a significant version of shoplifting versus Walmart, because it's a lot easier to have some level of sympathy for a first-time offender of shoplifting who made a dumb decision in a dumb moment when you're dealing with something like this. But when you're talking about what we're talking about here, you don't have a victimless crime, so to speak. You have a victim. You have a vulnerable victim, and that is not okay. You also have to factor in, this happened in the same place where Sandy Hook shooting took place. So there's a town level of sensitivity to crimes against children, because what happened? It was a while ago, but it wasn't that long ago. It's still in the collective mindset, I guess that's a word, of the local population and people around there, even on a state level. I'm trying to get through here without getting soaked because of dew on the trees. It is raining, and leaves do tend to do that. But the person, interestingly enough, only got 2 years of diversionary therapy related whatnot, and I don't honestly believe that's enough. I think if I were the judge, the other factor in this also, this is not as far along as I thought. This is the shitty part that's called the briar patch. There's your woodpecker. The other piece of this, because I do know the family where the perpetrator comes from. We got to backtrack. The person is in their early to mid 20s and suffers from a neurological developmental disorder. So they are more or less borderline special needs, although they were able to graduate college with the proper guidance. But that's toast now that they're very possibly a registered sex offender. I would think so, and if not, I have a problem with that. But honestly, I think because they are developmentally challenged, and that obviously was the defense. The thing is that the lawyer would be burdened in the course of making their defense of this that the neurological disorder can be tied directly to what happened because the kid's not thinking right because he has basically a chemically addled brain. But that really doesn't do anything to help the victim, and I think that no offense to the family, I know that is the greater consideration, is looking out for the victim and acting in a sense of social custodialness where you don't have them traumatized for the rest of their life, because things like that do stay with you. Mental abuse I suffered as a kid is with me to the present day and has shaped a lot of my own worldview. So I can relate on different levels, but still, kids do retain information a lot better than people think. And because of the disorder, I don't think being thrown into the prison system as a chomo, which is prison speak for child molester, is going to help. But because in that kind of a situation, there are YouTube channels from people who are ex-convicts that go into great detail about day-to-day life in jail and prison, and they are two very different things, by the way. Prison, turns out, is probably the lesser of two evils, because once you're there, you have your sentence and you are in there, you're in a cell block, and your day is structured and supervised by the corrections department. But they go into great details about the day-to-day realities of that environment. You ought to watch it, because it actually is rather fascinating to hear it from the inside point of view, so to speak. But a person who goes in labeled as a chomo is a target, is at the lowest part of the pecking order. And of all the people going in there, they're going to have the worst time possible. They're a target. So I don't think that's going to really help the situation per se, but I do think in this particular case, a diversionary program of 5 years with concurrent involvement by a parole officer that then goes on to like 5 years of probation after that. So we're talking a decade of supervision, so we make sure that it is pounded into your head that basically you got enough of a hard rap against the nose with a rolled up newspaper that there's no doubt in your mind. There's like a bruised nose and a black eye that basically says you don't do this again. Don't even have those thoughts in your head. I don't know how that psychology works, but you have to pound it through their head, and especially if this person is developmentally challenged. And that can be proven to be a contributing factor to what happened, which is why this is an interesting case in that way, because there are mitigating factors potentially. But it doesn't alter what they did, and it doesn't alter the potential damages to the victim. But because, as I will emphasize again, I do sympathize a lot more with the victim's family and agree more with them. They wanted, he got what he got under protest from notably the victim's father, and if you're the protective father of a little girl, that goes without explanation. That's self-explanatory. Not okay. I would think 5 and 5. You are like even 5 years of diversionary and then 5 years under a parole officer in a halfway house under day-to-day supervision of the corrections department, with an understanding that if there's even a hint of you doing anything remotely similar again, your ass is in the clink. Or specific to Connecticut, you're locked up in Whiting, which is a institution for the criminally insane. which isn't going to be any more of a picnic because you're in a hospital for the criminally insane. You're in there with people who are also, they're not just not very nice, they're also potentially maniacally serial killer dangerous. You don't want to be there, so fucking up a second time is not on the plate. That's enough of that subject, but I weirdly segued into that, and I have actual knowledge of it from start to finish. And the one thing I did find interesting about that is how I found out, which is I found out in a public internet search. I would think, given the sensitivity level of the age of the victim, this might have been kept hush-hush, but the aunt found out one on the internet, but it's also on the local news, so they want people to know who this guy is. And two things, even though I think the sentence is a bit light, the two things that him and his family are not going to escape are A, the notoriety and or what I'll call the pariah factor is now there, because people do know who he is, at least on a local or if not regional basis. And there's absolutely nothing preventing the victim's family from suing him on a civil basis. And due to the public nature of the thing, it's not in dispute this happened. So if they were to sue, you're effectively having the court walk out with a silver platter, and you're deciding how much you want to fucking sue them for. How much money are they going to cough up through garnished wages or whatever. And for a lot of people, maybe you don't think of that being the end game on that, but the liability at the end is going to be on the civil level, which, since we're weirdly on legal shit, if you're on the internet and you don't live in a cave, you may have heard of the DoorDash girl, and that's another one that has it's not a victimless crime. Now, granted, here the victim's an adult and ironically a male, and it's kind of a reverse thing where if you had in this one, for those that don't know, this is a DoorDash driver who went to the guy's house after he'd been out to the bars. He had the munchies, who ordered Wendy's, and she showed up and was told to drop the food off at his door and leave. And that's all she had to do. Instead, apparently this guy got drunk off his ass and effectively passed out, and the door was either open or she walked in and thought it was a good idea. There he is on his couch from the waist down for the world to see, so to speak. I think you can gather what I'm saying. And she decided, rather than just walk away or close the door or something more helpful, that she would film the gentleman, and she would then post it on TikTok to shame him and then falsely accuse him of sexual assault, despite the fact he's thoroughly unconscious the entire time. That earned her 2 Class E felonies. Now, I would have just said this is revenge porn and voyeurism, not to mention criminal trespass, if not outright burglary, but that's me. But they gave dissemination, like unlawful surveillance and dissemination of said unlawful surveillance, which in the state of New York apparently is a Class E felony. So collectively speaking, 8 years in prison is the max sentence, although here again you have a first-time offender, as far as we know. Kind of offset by the fact she made 3 or 4 videos on TikTok afterwards, doubling down, screaming she's the victim, literally word for word. And as far as the judge goes in this, showing really dick in the way of remorse. So she's conscious of what she did, and she doubled down, and at this point she has not been sentenced. She's been indicted, but she hasn't been sentenced, and more likely than not, a channel, by the way, by the name of Legal Mindset, who is a lawyer somewhere, broke it down, more likely than not, because she's a first-time offender, she's probably going to get like 3 to 4 months of probation. But again, where this is going to kill her is if the guy turns around and wants to sue her for defamation or something like that, she's fucked. Long story short, she is absolutely fucked, because he has There's no question this happened. You move this to a civil liability standpoint, that's why I'm bringing this up. You, again, are thoroughly hosed on that level. Should he decide to sue, the court's going to walk out with a big gilded platter, and the lawyer was thinking he could nail her for as much as $2 million. And as a DoorDash driver, she clearly does not have that. So what does that mean in the end? You're going to have garnished wages for decades. Even if you land the job of your dreams, that boy owns half of your paycheck, if not more. And if you're a flight risk because of the decision in that case, you probably can't get a passport and leave the country either. You're probably a flight risk. There's a lot of things you can't do because you have that debt, and that's crippling socially. So that's interesting. I'm going to take a break because I have delved well off the subject of looking for people. Then I'm going to dig around here, see if I can get out there and look out into the meadow and have a better look. But I'm going to cover a little bit of ground and, frankly, use nature to answer its call. We'll be back in a bit. And since we're talking pretty much everything but Bigfoot today, 2 bits of advice for what the knee just conveyed. Number 1, do the best you can to have something with you to wipe. And number 2, don't stand in a spot near brush. Self-explanatory. And yes, somebody did actually go out of the way to write a book, a full-length book on the subject of doing what I just did. Again, we're not going into detail. We have covered how to and all that on a different video and all that, but I don't think it's rocket science to figure out what we're talking about. So where we're going to go, if you can see off in the distance, you see how that opens up. That's where the meadow area is. And it is, in theory, a decent spot habitat-wise for something that's passing through, because I don't think they're in the area on a regular basis. I think they pass through depending on seasonal factors and following prey items like deer. There'd be more evidence of them being here more regularly if a sedentary population was more the case. But given the population density of the state, even out here in more outlying areas, I think that's more realistic than the thought that they are here in. Once upon a time, Matt Moneymaker said in the southeastern state corner, there could be as many as 3 clans. And to that I say, Matt Moneymaker operates as a Bigfooter on a for-profit basis and says a lot of things. Again, his last name is Moneymaker, so he claims. Somebody once upon a time, I think, had said what his real name is, but that's not the point of this. The point is, number 1, we don't know that they socialize in clan groups, and number 2, if you're to argue great apes, you have populations that operate in social groups and you have others that are more individualistic, so you can argue that either way on that model. But down in that area, especially when you're closer to the shore, there's not a lot of cover. And I have spent time in the 2 state forests in that corner of the state, and there's a significant enough human presence in there on a consistent point in time that I find that claim to be very optimistic. Now, could you have the odd 1 or 2 passing through? That's a lot more believable, just based on the logistics involved. But you got 3 clans, you got people seeing them and people reporting them. People aren't going to stay quiet about that. And he can take issue and he can make the immortal claim, I've been doing this for 25 years, and yet you don't have any more proof than anyone else. And to some of my critics who find my take to be cynical and skeptical and all that, too bad. That is the reality of it. He and all the other big names out there in Bigfooting talk a wonderful game. However, where's the monkey? You don't have one either. Okay. I thought for a moment I had lost my other magazine. I have not. I don't think that carries the same ugliness as dropping and not reporting a lost firearm, which is a bit draconian in the state. Little had I known that was a Class C misdemeanor for a first offense, graduating right up into felony country for a second offense, so don't do that. The fucked up thing about that, just on a rhetorical basis, is two extremes here in this regarding gun law in Connecticut. Let's say you lose it and you notice more than 3 days later. You dropped it in the woods, you come home from that somewhere, and you're going through your shit because you had to, well, any one of a number of reasons, and you suddenly notice, but you report it on the 4th day. You're going to be arrested for a Class C felony, a Class C misdemeanor, which, involving a firearm, probably in this state is going to carry jail time. Despite in every other way following the letter and the intent of the law, if not the spirit. Case in point about human presence, trashed little blind, and that. So deer hunters know where this is. They're usually the ones you share space with. But the point of the matter being, if on the other hand you are found carrying a firearm and you left your permit at home, guess what the penalty is for that? So in one example, you follow the spirit of the law, but you're a day late. You are now looking at probable jail time for a Class C misdemeanor. Let's say you just left the thing at home and you didn't care, but they can validate that you have one. You think you're going to jail, or do you think you're paying a $45? But you think you're going to jail, or you think you're paying a $35 fine? That one seems a lot less innocent potentially to me, and yet you can be penalized, basically glorified beer money. Whereas the other way, you're going to jail for something that you may not have done with any malfeasance in mind, but here we are. Yet another example of the lopsided freaking gun laws the state has, which should lead you to the right conclusion that, one, I'm not a Democrat, and two, I am a lot more pro-gun than I ain't. Even when I didn't have guns, I was. I'm still of the impression that, on a philosophical basis, the right to self-defense is something that's right up there alongside the right of basically any species out there under the sun has some sense of self-preservation. And that is not something that is subject to legislation or the opinions of a politician. They don't get to enforce that. That is a fundamental human right. We're on the edge of the meadow, but not. But even as I'm sucking, there's the pollen, some kind of pollen. There's nothing keeping us from advancing a little ways out here to have a better look, so we will. I find myself, as I brought up the act of potentially losing the fire, I'm touching. I mean, it's in a pocket secured now where it's not going to probably fall out that easily, but where it's carrying, you can feel it against you too. So, but finding it when I did actually drop it one day briefly in the snow, you have a black object against white snow. In the middle of this, you have a problematic day that took a turn you didn't want it to do. Because that's not a conversation. That's not a conversation I want to have. I'd rather not talk to them at all about having it on me, but as we are now, I have A, that, and B, my permit, so they really don't have anything to say about it if I'm not holding up a liquor store. And oddly enough, that wasn't really on the day's agenda, so there's the moose tracks. Only covering up, but trying to get through here without getting soaked to get a better idea to see how open this is, because if you have a relatively flat, non-swampy area in here, you could actually get some trail cams out here, but it's looking more swampy. We're still in the swampy area, I think. I don't really feel like going all the way over. I mean, granted, the entire trip over here is basically paralleling this pattern of. I mean, this meadow system is kind of like a big peanut-shaped thing that goes way the fuck over there. But pardon my French. But this is a lot swampier looking than I thought. The easier section's way the hell over there. And I was briefly tempted to bring my drone and my backpack out here and get it over here, but launching is fun because you got to find a spot that isn't all of that. Landing as well. So I'm going to put this down, get some photography in of this, and then we're going to move on. And interestingly enough, you have a wetland thing way the hell over there, which is basically our way back, and then it looks like you might have one over there, kitty corn, because in the middle of this, way the hell in there, there's a little peanut-shaped section that may be the briar patch, or it might be an additional one that's not really that big, but it's there. So enough of me yammering. Let me get this done, and I can de-sagify my feet. For a brief second, ever so briefly, because of the seasonal changes, we had a momentary feeling of just the area looked different from what I'm used to. And you have that thoroughly human capacity for second guessing your surroundings, and then but stupidly going off in a direction that may not get you thoroughly lost, but enough you start to second guess yourself. And the more you do it, the more you're going to turn yourself around, and you're just making a I mean, you're probably in an area this big, in the greatest of likelihoods, you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to walk around in circles for a while and then realize where you are and call yourself dummy and move on. But in principle, in a larger area, like if I had gone to Vermont and did this, and that has happened there briefly, on 2 different occasions, you are in an area where that can turn into your day. Now, as it turns out, with all the green shit coming up, this does look completely different, but the beaver pond is right there. Long as you stay parallel to the water source, and yes, this is a navigational hack, you will come back to the point of entry that is this delightfully beautiful beaver pond right here, and then you hit which is a trail that was either made by deer hunters or bullwinkle, or a unknowing collaboration of both, and you can ascertain where you are and orient yourself, which is the current classical use of the word. I mean, the correct classical use of the word. And fuck the British for trying to make it into orientate, which adds a whole extra syllable and just really bothers the grammar Nazi in me. But we're a little lower down the hill than where I normally end up heading back this way. I'm gonna even that out now, because that down tree right there is usually a landmark we work with. That said, though, we are on track for a smooth departure, and it does look a lot different because it's normally all the grass coming up doesn't look as obvious, or isn't as, what's the right word, when you're in winter this is all flat and it's a lot more obvious where you are. When you have all the green, it starts looking different. You might actually run into that at night too. But as I said, this area does change in appearance quite a bit as the seasons change, and has these weird gnarly trees you seem to only find in southern New England state forests. And At night, that probably looks gnarly as hell. Anyway, barring the actual sighting of the creature itself, this is as good a time as any to end yet another rambling episode of Mike talking about stuff in the woods. Probably should rename the channel that at this point. But like, subscribe, leave commentary of your choice. And here's a thought. Leave a comment if you would be interested in some night doing like a live stream thing. Either general discussion, subject specific, or not. Because we could do that on Facebook, we could do that on YouTube, we could do that in a number of formats. I think I have a Discord too, but I never use it. I also have a Telegram thing that I don't use because I didn't realize at the time that that's usually equated with people that end up on watch lists because it's an encrypted app, and the result of which is that you have people doing crypto scams and other nefarious activities on there. So I'm glad I didn't take it under my regular name, and I'm glad that I've never done anything with it because I don't intend to at this point, knowing that. And for those of you that didn't know, just on a completely unrelated basis, guess who owns TikTok? If you didn't know, the People's Republic of China. So for all those Gen Z people out there doing stupid shit on TikTok, all that embarrassing information about you is being freaking gobbled up by the Chinese Communist Party. You might think about that next time you log on. Anyway, as I said, we'll end on a sweeping view of that lovely beaver pond. Sometimes you have ducks, so I don't think I've ever seen a loon out there. We might be a little bit far south for them, although you definitely have them in Vermont. And weird gnarly trees like this, that's what I'm talking about. And this is about as good a point as any to end, so on that basis I will. What I mean to say by that is bye.